The icy mountain water slammed into Willow Reed with such force that she lost her footing before she could even scream. One moment she'd been kneeling at the creek's edge, scrubbing at her father's work shirts in the clear water, and the next she was being pulled downstream by a raging torrent that had appeared as if from nowhere, her washboard and laundry scattered like leaves in a windstorm. "Help!" she cried, gasping as the frigid water closed over her head. Spring runoff from the mountains had always made Cottonwood Creek run high and fast, but there had been no warning of this sudden wall of water that now carried her helplessly through the canyon outside Tonopah, Nevada. Willow clawed desperately at the water, managing to surface just as her body slammed into a partially submerged boulder. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, but she clung to the rough surface, her fingers bleeding as they sought purchase on the slick stone. The roar of the flash flood was deafening, drowning out her cries for help as the water continued to rise around her. It was 1879, and Willow had moved to Tonopah just 6 months earlier with her father after her mother's death. At 22, she had taken over the household duties while her father worked his small silver claim in the hills. They lived in a modest cabin a mile outside town, and Willow had walked to the creek that morning as she did every Monday, never imagining the danger that awaited her. "Lord help me," she whispered, feeling her grip weakening as the water surged higher, now reaching her shoulders as she clung to the rock. Her long brown hair hung in soaked tangles around her face, and her simple calico dress was torn and plastered to her body. She knew with terrible certainty that she couldn't hold on much longer. Downstream, Darius Lawson was riding back to town after delivering a small herd to a ranch north of Tonopah when he heard an unusual roaring sound echoing through the canyon. Reining in his horse, the 30-year-old cowboy listened intently, his weathered face furrowing beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "What in tarnation?" he muttered, turning his mount toward the creek. As he crested the rise, his eyes widened at the sight of the normally peaceful Cottonwood Creek, transformed into a raging river that had burst its banks. Years of working cattle in Nevada's unpredictable landscape had taught him to recognize the signs of a flash flood likely caused by a cloudburst in the mountains miles away. He was about to turn back when something caught his eye, a pale shape in the middle of the churning water, clinging to a rock. Squinting against the sun's glare, Darius realized with a shock that it was a woman, her form barely visible as the water surged around her. Without hesitation, Darius spurred his horse down the slope toward the creek. "Hold on," he shouted, though he doubted she could hear him over the roar of the water. His mind raced through possibilities as he reached the creek's edge. The current was too strong to swim, and the woman looked moments away from losing her grip. Darius made a split-second decision. He urged his horse, Rusty, a sturdy Palomino gelding who had been his faithful companion for 7 years, toward the edge of the swollen creek. "Come on, boy," he murmured, patting the horse's neck. "We've got to help her." Rusty balked at first, sensing the danger, but responded to his master's confident commands. Darius guided him into the rushing water, immediately feeling the powerful pull of the current against the horse's legs. Rusty whinnied in protest but pressed forward, his powerful muscles straining against the force of the water. The creek was normally only a few feet deep, but the flash flood had transformed it into a dangerous torrent nearly 5 feet deep in places. Darius leaned forward in the saddle, speaking calmly to Rusty as they moved deeper, the water now reaching the horse's chest. Willow thought she was hallucinating when she saw the figure on horseback moving into the flood toward her. Her arms ached from holding onto the rock, and she had already resigned herself to being swept away at any moment. But as the horse and rider drew closer, fighting their way through the current, hope flared within her. "Hold on, miss," the man called, his voice barely audible over the rushing water. "I'm coming for you." Darius guided Rusty with expert precision, using the horse's strength to battle the current while keeping them both balanced. When they finally reached the boulder where Willow clung, he extended his hand toward her. "Take my hand," he shouted. "You'll have to let go and trust me." Willow stared up at him, terror evident in her wide blue eyes. Her fingers were white with the effort of holding on, and her lips had taken on a bluish tinge from the cold. "I can't," she cried, her voice thin with fear. "You can," Darius insisted, his eyes locked with hers. "I won't let you go, I promise." Something in his steady gaze gave Willow courage. With a silent prayer, she released one hand from the rock and reached for him. Their fingers brushed, then clasped tightly together. In one fluid motion, Darius pulled her from the rock and swung her up behind him on the saddle. "Hold on to me," he ordered, and Willow wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his back as Rusty began the treacherous journey back to shore. The return was even more dangerous, as the horse now carried double weight against the surging current. Several times, Rusty stumbled, nearly sending them all into the flood. Darius kept his voice steady, encouraging the horse while acutely aware of the woman's trembling form behind him. When they finally reached the creek bank, Darius didn't stop but urged Rusty up the slope and away from the still rising water. Only when they reached higher ground did he halt and turn in the saddle to check on his passenger. Willow was shaking uncontrollably, her lips blue with cold and her dress in tatters. Her arms remained locked around his waist as if she couldn't bear to let go. "You're safe now, miss," Darius said gently, prying her fingers loose so he could dismount. He reached up to help her down, catching her as her legs buckled beneath her. "My name's Darius Lawson. What's yours?" "Willow Reed," she managed through chattering teeth. "Thank you. You saved my life." Darius quickly removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "We need to get you warm. My cabin's closer than town." "Can you ride a little longer?" Willow nodded, too exhausted and cold to speak further. Darius lifted her onto Rusty's back and mounted behind her, cradling her against his chest as he turned the horse toward his property a mile away. As they rode, Darius felt a strange protectiveness toward the woman in his arms. He'd been a loner since arriving in Nevada 5 years earlier, working as a ranch hand and occasionally as a guide for mining companies. He kept to himself, haunted by memories of the war and the family he'd lost back east. But something about Willow's vulnerability touched a place in his heart he thought had hardened beyond reach. By the time they reached his modest cabin nestled against the foothills, Willow was barely conscious. Darius carried her inside and placed her gently on the single chair by the fireplace. Working quickly, he built up the fire from the morning's embers and put water on to boil. "Miss Reed," he said, kneeling before her. "Willow, you need to get out of those wet clothes. I have a shirt and some trousers that might fit you well enough." Willow's eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with difficulty. "I can't. It wouldn't be proper." Despite her dire situation, she still clung to propriety, and Darius found himself respecting her for it. "You'll catch your death if you stay in those wet things. I'll step outside while you change. The clothes are on the bed there." He placed a folded shirt and pair of trousers beside her, then added a wool blanket. "I'll be right outside the door if you need anything." Willow waited until the door closed behind him before struggling to her feet. Her fingers were nearly useless with cold as she fumbled with the buttons of her dress. Finally, she managed to strip off the sodden garment and her equally drenched undergarments. She dried herself as best she could with a corner of the blanket before pulling on Darius's clothing. The shirt hung almost to her knees, and she had to roll the trousers up several times, but they were blessedly dry. "I'm decent," she called weakly, wrapping the blanket around herself for good measure. Darius re-entered, his eyes assessing her condition with concern. "You're still too cold," he observed, moving to the fire to check the water. Finding it hot enough, he poured some into a mug and added dried mint leaves and a spoonful of honey. "Drink this," he said, pressing the steaming mug into her hands. "It'll warm you from the inside." Willow accepted the drink gratefully, letting the steam warm her face before taking a cautious sip. The sweetened mint tea spread warmth through her chest, and she sighed with relief. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "Most men wouldn't have risked themselves like that." Darius shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Couldn't very well ride by and watch you drown." He busied himself hanging her wet clothes near the fire to dry. "What were you doing out there anyway?" "Washing clothes," Willow explained, her voice growing steadier as warmth returned to her body. "I go to that spot every Monday, the water. It came out of nowhere." "Flash flood," Darius said. "Happens when there's heavy rain in the mountains. The water rushes down the canyons without warning." He paused, looking at her more carefully. "You're Joseph Reed's daughter, aren't you? I've seen you in town." Willow nodded. "We moved here last fall after my mother died." "I'm sorry for your loss," Darius said quietly. A comfortable silence fell between them as Willow continued to sip her tea, and Darius prepared a simple meal of beans, biscuits, and dried venison. The storm that had caused the flash flood began to make itself known at the cabin, with rain pattering against the roof and wind whistling through the pine trees outside. "Your father will be worried," Darius observed as he set a plate of food before her. "As soon as the rain lets up, I'll take you home." Willow glanced toward the window where the storm showed no signs of abating. "Thank you for everything." As she ate, color gradually returned to her cheeks, and Darius found himself noticing how pretty she was, with her large blue eyes and delicate features. Her long brown hair was beginning to dry into loose waves that framed her face. He quickly looked away when she caught him staring. "Have you lived here long, Mr. Lawson?" she asked, breaking the awkward moment. "5 years," he replied, turning his attention to his own plate. "Came west after the war, needed open spaces after everything." Willow sensed the pain behind his words and didn't press for details. "It is beautiful country," she offered instead, "though lonelier than I expected. In Pennsylvania, we had neighbors close by. Here, it feels like everyone keeps to themselves." "That's part of the appeal for some," Darius said with a hint of a smile. "But folks around here are good people when you need them. Just respect their space and their ways." The storm intensified as they talked, thunder cracking overhead and rain now pounding against the cabin walls. Darius glanced outside with a frown. "Seems we might be waiting a while," he said. "Creek will be impassable until the water recedes." Willow's face paled. "My father, he'll think I've been swept away." Darius considered this problem. "If the rain stops soon, I might be able to ride to town and get word to him, but I won't leave you alone until I'm sure you've recovered." "I'm feeling much better," Willow assured him, though in truth she still felt weak and shaken from her ordeal. "Please don't trouble yourself further on my account." Darius studied her face, noting the lingering pallor beneath her returning color. "Let's see how the weather fares in an hour or so," he suggested. "In the meantime, you should rest. You can take the bed, I'll sit by the fire." Willow began to protest, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. She allowed Darius to help her to the simple bed in the corner of the one-room cabin. As he tucked the blankets around her, their hands brushed briefly, sending an unexpected warmth through Willow that had nothing to do with the fire or the tea. "Thank you," she whispered again, her eyes already closing as fatigue claimed her. Darius watched her for a moment, struck by how quickly this stranger had disrupted his solitary existence and how little he minded the intrusion. With a sigh, he settled into the chair by the fire to wait out the storm. The rain continued for hours, sometimes slackening to a gentle patter before returning with renewed fury. Darius dozed intermittently, waking fully when he heard Willow stirring. She sat up, looking disoriented for a moment before her gaze fell on him. "How long have I slept?" she asked, pushing her hair back from her face. "A few hours," Darius replied, stretching his stiff muscles as he rose. "Storm's not letting up. I'm afraid we're stuck here for the night." Willow's eyes widened. "But my reputation, your life matters more," Darius said firmly. "No one with any sense would expect you to travel in this weather after what you've been through." Though clearly uncomfortable with the situation, Willow nodded her acceptance. "You're right, of course. I've never been alone with a man who wasn't family." "I give you my word as a gentleman that you're safe here," Darius said solemnly. "I'll sleep by the fire." As evening fell, the storm finally began to ease. They shared another simple meal, and Darius told Willow about his life before coming west growing up in Virginia, fighting for the Union despite his Southern roots, and losing his parents and younger sister to typhoid while he was away at war. "I came home to nothing," he said quietly, staring into the fire. "Decided there was no point staying where everything reminded me of what I'd lost." "I understand that feeling," Willow replied softly. "After Mother died, Father couldn't bear our home anymore. He'd heard stories about silver in Nevada, so we sold everything and came west." She smiled sadly. "I think he hoped the journey would help me too. I was engaged to be married, but my fiancé, he changed his mind when Mother fell ill. Said he couldn't tie himself to a family with consumption in its blood." Darius frowned. "Sounds like a coward. You're better off without him." "Perhaps," Willow said, though the pain of rejection still lingered. "In any case, we came to Tanapa to start over. Father's claim hasn't produced much yet, but he's hopeful." "Hope's important," Darius agreed. "Without it, what's the point of anything?" They talked late into the night, sharing stories and discovering shared interests. Both loved reading, had a fondness for horses, and harbored secret dreams of seeing the ocean someday. When Willow finally returned to the bed, leaving Darius to make a pallet near the hearth, she felt as if she'd known him for years rather than hours. Morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night. Willow woke to the smell of coffee and found Darius already dressed and preparing breakfast. "Your clothes should be dry," he said by way of greeting. "I checked the creek earlier. It's still running high but passable on horseback. We can leave after breakfast if you're feeling up to it." Willow gathered her now dry clothing and stepped behind a blanket Darius had hung as a makeshift privacy screen. As she changed, she felt oddly reluctant to return to her normal life. Something about Darius Lawson fascinated her: his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the sadness that lingered in his eyes despite his occasional smile. They rode double on Rusty, Willow again positioned in front of Darius with his arms around her to hold the reins. The closeness felt both improper and thrilling, and Willow found herself hyper-aware of every place their bodies touched. When they reached the Reed cabin, Joseph Reed burst out the door before they had fully dismounted. He had clearly been frantic with worry, his normally neat appearance disheveled and his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "Willow," he cried, rushing forward to help her down. "My God, I thought I'd lost you too, when you didn't come home and then the storm." He embraced her tightly, then held her at arm's length to examine her. "Are you hurt? What happened?" As Willow explained about the flash flood and her rescue, Joseph's attention turned to Darius, who had dismounted and stood holding Rusty's reins. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Lawson," Joseph said, extending his hand. "You saved my daughter's life." Darius shook the offered hand. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Joseph said firmly. "They wouldn't. Not many men would ride into a flash flood for a stranger." He glanced between Darius and Willow, noting the way they looked at each other. "You must stay for dinner at least. It's the least we can do." Darius hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, sir. I'd be honored." That dinner was the first of many. Over the following weeks, Darius found increasingly frequent reasons to visit the Reed homestead. He helped Joseph repair the roof damaged in the storm, offered advice on improving the small vegetable garden Willow tended, and occasionally brought game he'd hunted to supplement their meals. For her part, Willow looked forward to his visits with growing anticipation. She took special care with her appearance when she knew he might come by, and found herself thinking about him during the quiet moments of her days. There was something so solid and trustworthy about Darius' qualities her former fiancé had ultimately lacked. Spring turned to summer, and the people of Tanapa grew accustomed to seeing the quiet cowboy and the storekeeper's daughter together. They made an attractive pair, he tall and broad-shouldered with his dark hair and serious expression. She slender and graceful with her warm smile and gentle manner. One evening in late July, Darius invited Willow for a ride to watch the sunset from a hillside overlooking the valley. They sat side by side on a blanket, the evening breeze carrying the scent of sagebrush and pine as the sky painted itself in brilliant oranges and purples. "I never thought I'd find beauty in a place so different from my home," Willow admitted, drawing her knees to her chest as she gazed at the spectacular view. Pennsylvania was all green forests and gentle hills. This land seemed so harsh at first. "It is harsh," Darius agreed, "but honest in its harshness. The desert doesn't pretend to be something it's not." Willow glanced at him, admiring his profile in the fading light. "Is that why you came here?" "For the honesty, partly," he said, turning to meet her gaze, "and partly because I needed to find myself again. The war, it changes a man, makes him question everything he thought he knew." "And have you found yourself, I mean?" Darius was quiet for a long moment. "I thought I had. I'd made my peace with being alone, with working my small ranch and taking odd jobs when needed. I didn't think I wanted or needed anything more." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "And then I saw you in that creek and everything changed." Willow's heart quickened at his words and the intensity in his eyes. "Changed how?" she asked softly. Instead of answering with words, Darius leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand, but when Willow responded by sliding her hand to his shoulder and drawing closer, the kiss deepened into something that made her dizzy with longing. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Darius rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day I pulled you from that flood," he confessed. "You brought something back to life in me, Willow, something I thought had died for good." "I feel the same," Willow whispered. "When Thomas broke our engagement, I thought I'd never trust my heart to anyone again, but you're nothing like him. You're brave and kind and honorable." Darius kissed her again, more briefly this time. "I'm just a simple man with a small ranch and modest prospects, but everything I have, everything I am, is yours if you want it." "Are you asking me to marry you, Darius Lawson?" Willow asked, a smile playing at her lips. "I reckon I am," he replied, suddenly looking nervous. "Though I should probably ask your father's blessing first." Willow laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet hillside. "Father already considers you family. He told me last week that he's never seen a finer man and he'd be proud to call you son. They stayed on the hillside until the first stars appeared, planning their future together. Darius spoke of expanding his small ranch, of building a larger cabin for them to share. Willow talked of planting fruit trees and perhaps opening a small school for the children of Tanapa, who currently had to travel to the next town for education. Their wedding took place in September, a simple ceremony in the small church in Tanapa. The entire town turned out to celebrate Darius had earned their respect through his hard work and integrity, and Willow had won their affection with her kindness and willingness to help neighbors in need. Joseph Reed gave his daughter away with tears in his eyes, though they were tears of joy rather than sadness. He had worried about leaving Willow alone when his time came, but now he could rest easy knowing she had found a good man who would cherish her as she deserved. The newlyweds moved into Darius's cabin, which he had spent the previous months expanding and improving. He'd added a proper bedroom, enlarged the main living area, and built sturdy furniture with his own hands. Willow transformed the simple structure into a home, adding curtains she'd sewn, arranging wildflowers in jars on the table, and filling the shelves with books they both loved. Their first winter as husband and wife brought heavy snows that kept them largely confined to the cabin for weeks at a time. But rather than finding the isolation difficult, they treasured the uninterrupted time together. Darius taught Willow to play chess, and she read aloud to him in the evenings by the fire. They learned each other's bodies as thoroughly as they learned each other's minds, their passion for one another deepening with each passing day. When spring arrived, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land, Willow discovered she was carrying their first child. Darius's reaction to the news was one of pure joy. He lifted her in his arms and spun her around the cabin, then set her down quickly, worried he might have jarred her. "Are you all right? I shouldn't have done that," he fretted, his hands hovering near her still flat stomach. Willow laughed and took his hands, placing them firmly on her abdomen. "I'm not made of glass, Darius. I'm perfectly healthy and so is our baby." As Willow's pregnancy progressed, Darius became even more protective, especially when the anniversary of the flash flood approached. He insisted on doing the laundry himself, rather than letting Willow go near the creek, despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. "I nearly lost you once before I even knew you," he said firmly. "I won't risk losing you now that you're my whole world." The memory of the flood remained vivid for both of them, a reminder of how quickly life could change for better or worse. When Cottonwood Creek rose with the spring runoff, they both watched it warily, respecting its power even as they were grateful for the water it provided. In late November, as the first snow of winter began to fall, Willow gave birth to a son they named William Joseph Lawson. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and both parents were immediately besotted with him. "He's perfect," Darius whispered, cradling the tiny infant with hands that seemed enormous in comparison. "Absolutely perfect." Willow watched her husband with their son, her heart so full of love it seemed impossible it could be contained within her chest. The journey that had brought them together had been harrowing, but she wouldn't change a moment of it if doing so meant not ending up exactly where she was now. As William grew, so did the Lawson Ranch. With Joseph Reed's help, Darius was able to purchase adjacent land and increase his herd of cattle. The silver mine that had brought the Reeds to Nevada never did produce the fortune Joseph had hoped for, but by combining their resources, the family prospered nonetheless. Willow started a small school in one room of the enlarged cabin, teaching not only her own son, but the children of neighboring ranches who previously had no access to education. Her gentle manner and patient teaching style made her popular with students and parents alike. 3 years after William's birth, a daughter joined the family, Elizabeth Rose, named after Darius's mother and Willow's. She was followed 2 years later by another son, James. The Lawson home was filled with laughter, occasional tears, and the constant bustle of family life. On the 10th anniversary of the flash flood that had brought them together, Darius took Willow back to the spot where he had pulled her from the water. Cottonwood Creek was peaceful now, gurgling gently over rocks in the late spring sunshine. "I still have nightmares sometimes," Darius admitted as they stood hand in hand by the water's edge. "I dream that I'm too late or that Rusty can't make it through the current." Willow squeezed his hand. "But you weren't too late. You saved me." Darius turned to face her, his expression serious. "You saved me too, Willow, in a different way but just as surely. I was drowning in loneliness and grief, and you pulled me back to life." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that 10 years had added around his eyes. "We saved each other," she corrected. "And look at all we've built together because of it." That evening, they hosted a gathering at their ranch, no longer the simple cabin of their early marriage, but a proper home with rooms for their children, a dedicated schoolroom, and a wide porch where neighbors gathered for music and conversation on summer evenings. Joseph Reed, now in his 70s but still spry, played the fiddle while the children danced and the adults visited. As twilight fell, Darius found Willow watching their children play with their friends. He slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Lawson," he murmured. Willow leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him. "I was just thinking how strange and wonderful life is. If not for that terrible flood, we might never have met." "I'd like to think we would have found each other somehow," Darius said. "Some things are meant to be, flood or no flood." "Do you really believe that?" Willow asked, turning in his arms to look up at him. "I do," he said with certainty. "From the moment I saw you in that water, I knew you were someone special, and every day since has only proved me right." Willow stood on tiptoe to kiss him, not caring who might see. After 10 years of marriage, their passion for one another hadn't diminished, it had merely deepened. Enriched by shared joys and sorrows, by the family they had created together, by the life they had built from the foundation of that terrifying day when a cowboy had ridden through a raging current to save a woman caught in a flash flood. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Darius and Willow sat on their porch, watching the stars appear in the vast Nevada sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him in comfortable silence. "I've been thinking," Darius said eventually. "William's almost old enough to take on more responsibility around the ranch. Maybe it's time we took that trip we've always talked about." Willow looked up at him in surprise. "To the ocean? Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Darius replied with a smile. "We could go to San Francisco, see the Pacific, maybe even travel down to San Diego. Joseph could stay with the children. It would be our second honeymoon." Willow's face lit up with excitement. "Oh, Darius, I'd love that. I've dreamed of seeing the ocean for so long." "Then we'll do it," he promised. "This fall after harvest. We'll take the train west and not come back until you've had your fill of seashells and salt air." The trip to California that fall was everything they had dreamed of and more. They stood together on the cliffs above the Pacific, awestruck by the endless expanse of water stretching to the horizon. They walked barefoot on the beach, collecting shells and watching the sunset paint the water with gold and crimson light. They ate seafood caught that morning and explored the bustling streets of San Francisco, both of them wide-eyed at the city's grandeur. But for all the wonders they saw, the best part of the journey was sharing it with each other. They returned to Nevada refreshed and renewed, carrying seashells and memories to share with their children. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing family. William, so like his father in temperament and appearance, took to ranching with natural ability. Elizabeth, thoughtful and bookish, assisted her mother with teaching and dreamed of attending college in the East. James, the youngest, combined his father's physical prowess with his mother's gentle heart, becoming known throughout the region for his skill with even the most difficult horses. As their children grew into adults with dreams and plans of their own, Darius and Willow found new sweetness in their time together. They still rode out to watch sunsets, still read to each other by the fire on winter evenings, still sought each other's embrace with undiminished desire. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children surprised them with a party that brought together friends and neighbors from miles around. William, now married with 2 children of his own, gave a toast that brought tears to many eyes. "My earliest memory," he said, holding his glass high, "is of my father telling me the story of how he met my mother, how he saw her caught in a flood and didn't hesitate to ride into danger to save her. As a boy, I thought it was the most romantic thing I'd ever heard, my father, the hero, rescuing my mother like a princess in a fairy tale." He smiled at his parents, who sat hand in hand at the head table. "As I grew older, I came to understand that the story was more than just a daring rescue. It was the beginning of a love that has shaped not just their lives but all of ours. They taught us by example what it means to face life's floods together, to be brave, to hold fast to each other when the waters rise, to build something beautiful from even the most frightening beginnings." William raised his glass higher. "To my parents, Darius and Willow Lawson, may the next 30 years bring you as much joy as you have brought to all who know you." The gathering erupted in cheers and applause. Darius, never comfortable being the center of attention, nevertheless stood and pulled Willow to her feet beside him. "Thank you all," he said simply. "I'm not one for speeches, as you know, but I will say this: the day I rode into that flood was the luckiest day of my life." He looked down at Willow, his eyes full of love. "And I'd do it again in a heartbeat." Willow squeezed his hand, too moved to speak. After all these years, the memory of that day still had the power to overwhelm her: the terror of the rushing water, the miraculous appearance of the cowboy on horseback, the moment when she'd placed her life in his hands and he had not let her fall. That night, lying in each other's arms in the bedroom of the home they had built together, Willow traced the lines on Darius's face, lines that spoke of years in the sun, of laughter and worry, and all the emotions that made up a life well lived. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd taken a different route that day?" she asked softly. "If you hadn't heard the flood or seen me in the water?" Darius captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I used to think about it sometimes, but not anymore. Some things are meant to be, remember. If it hadn't been the flood, it would have been something else. Our paths were always going to cross." "I believe that too," Willow said, "but I'm still grateful it was you who found me that day. You, with your strong hands and your steady horse and your eyes that saw me when I thought I was invisible." "You could never be invisible, Willow Lawson," Darius murmured, drawing her closer. "Not to me. From that first moment, you've been the brightest thing in my world." As they drifted toward sleep in the quiet darkness, the sound of water came to them, not the threatening roar of a flash flood, but the gentle music of the stream that now flowed through their property, tamed by years of careful management. It was the same water that had nearly taken Willow's life all those years ago, now channeled to nurture their garden, water their livestock, and sustain the life they had built together. Like the stream, The memory of that fateful day had been transformed over time from a story of terror and near tragedy to one of courage, connection, and the beginning of an enduring love. It remained a central chapter in their shared history, a reminder of how quickly life could change and how precious each moment together truly was. In the years that followed their anniversary celebration, Darius and Willow watched with pride as their grandchildren grew, as their ranch prospered under William's management, as Elizabeth established a proper school in Tonopah, and as James became known throughout Nevada for his skill with horses. Joseph Reed lived to the remarkable age of 92, spending his final years in comfortable rooms added to the Lawson home specifically for him. When he passed peacefully in his sleep, he was mourned not just by his family, but by the entire community that had come to respect the quiet dignity with which he had faced life's challenges. Time brought changes to Tonopah and to Nevada. The railroad expanded, bringing more settlers. Silver mines played out, and new ones opened. The small frontier settlement gradually transformed into a proper town with a bank, a newspaper, and even a telephone office. Through it all, the Lawson Ranch remained a constant, a place of welcome, of hard work honestly done, of family bonds that could weather any storm. When Darius and Willow celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, they did so surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. They were in their 70s by then, their hair white, their steps slower, but their love for each other undimmed by the passage of years. After the celebration, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in shades of gold and purple. Darius's arm was around Willow's shoulders, her head resting against him just as it had countless times before. 50 years, Willow marveled softly. It seems impossible that so much time has passed. And yet it feels like yesterday that I saw you in that flood, Darius replied, his voice roughened by age but still strong. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, even soaking wet and scared half to death. Willow laughed, the sound as musical as it had been when she was young. And I remember thinking you were either very brave or very foolish, riding that horse into such dangerous water. A bit of both, probably, Darius admitted with a chuckle, but I couldn't just ride by and do nothing. Something about you. I knew I had to try. They fell silent, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. The ranch was quiet around them, the day's work done, the younger generations having returned to their own homes after the celebration. We've had a good life, haven't we? Willow asked after a while, her hand finding his as it had so many times before. Darius squeezed her fingers gently. The best life, my love, better than I ever dared hope for. As darkness settled over the land they had tended for half a century, Darius and Willow Lawson remained on their porch, two figures silhouetted against the lamplight spilling from their home. They were no longer the young cowboy and the girl from the flood. But their love had only grown stronger with each passing year, a love born in danger, tested by time, and ultimately triumphant over all the challenges life had placed in its path. And far below their hillside home, Cottonwood Creek continued its eternal journey through the landscape, its waters now calm and controlled, but still holding the memory of that long-ago day when a flash flood had brought together two souls destined to weather life's storms as one.